Today we're going to be talking about teams, and it's really important to understand teams. A lot of the undergraduate students I talk to, they're like, oh, team projects are the worst, and someone's always slacking, and there's always conflict, and yada, 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 and like, I just can't wait to get done with college, so I never have to do a team project again. That's absolutely not the case. That basically everything you do as an adult is a team project in some way. That you're always relying on your coworkers, your supervisors to give you the resources, the information that you need to be successful at what you do at your job. And of course, when you go home with your family or your roommates, keeping a house clean, that is a team effort as well. And basically everything you do as an adult is embedded in a team in some way. And it's incredibly important to understand teams and understand how to function successfully in teams. We're going to talk about 5 different design components of teams today. We're going to talk about goal clarity, task structure, composition, function, and norms. We'll begin by talking about goal clarity. Goal clarity is the extent to which the team understands its objectives. How clear is the team about what they need to accomplish, what the specifications of the final products are going to look like, when it needs to be done. All of those things are caught up in goal clarity. Well-written goals are one of the most effective ways to change and guide and manage human behavior. And we're going to spend a lot of time this semester talking about SMART goals. In fact, our next lecture is going to be all about goals. So I'm not going to dwell too much on goal clarity here. Just know that we'll be talking about this in our next lecture and throughout the entire semester.
All right, so we're talking about the 5 design components of teams. We just talked about goal clarity and specifically SMART goals. Next, we'll talk about task structure. Task structure is concerned with how the group's work is designed. There are 2 main dimensions of task structure. The first is coordination, and the second is regulation. Coordination is the degree to which successful completion of the task is dependent upon the combined work of multiple teammates. So when we talked about coordination, we talked about specialization in regard to organizational structure. So back in the day, it was one person making a sweater from sheep to sweater. 1 or 2 people were responsible for that. Whereas nowadays, we've split tasks up into more specialized subsets. So now we have an organization that raises the sheep, an organization that shears the sheep, an organization that spins the yarn, an organization that knits the sweater, and then a company that sells the sweater as well. And even within those companies, we have specialization. So in the company that has, or that does the knitting, you have the people that actually do the knitting, you have people in finance who make sure the bills get paid, you have people in marketing who try to make other people want to buy the finished sweaters. And because of this specialization, we now need someone, a manager, to coordinate all of those activities. And that's what the coordination aspect of teams is how much do those tasks have to be coordinated? Some of the work that I do as a professor is really high in coordination. Most of the work that I do is very low in coordination. So if you think about what I'm going to teach on any given day in one of my lectures, that's entirely up to me. I don't coordinate with the other professors on that usually. When I'm grading students' assignments and giving them feedback on that, that's usually something that I'm doing, in a completely solitary way. Other aspects of my job do require high coordination. So when we decide curriculum for the entire business program, that's something that we do as a faculty. And we try to understand how the courses we teach connect to that overall picture of the total education that we want to give to our students. And so in that way, we talk a lot about what skills can I teach in my class to build upon the skills that you learn in other classes. So that would be high coordination. Assembly lines require really high coordination. The whole point of an assembly line is that everyone is kind of moving and working together in tandem. And especially with a moving assembly line, it's like, hey, I got to do my job. I got to do it in the same amount of time as someone else. Like it's this just like incredibly choreographed dance almost. That would be really high coordination. Healthcare is an industry that's becoming much more coordinated, or I should say the healthcare organizations are becoming more coordinated. So back in the day, back when I was a kid, and honestly, most healthcare organizations are still like this, but you would have a separate doctor for everything that you went to, or a separate healthcare professional for everything that you felt was wrong with you. So you would have a cardiologist that you would talk to about your heart. You would have a nutritionist that you talk to about your diet. You might have a therapist that you talk to about your mental health. And these were all kind of siloed. Your cardiologist never talked to your nutritionist or your therapist. We're taking a much more holistic view of health now and realizing that the problems that you're having with your heart are really problems that you have with your diet, and the problem you're having with your diet is really because you're stressed out or because you don't have time to cook better. So we can't treat health in these silos. We have to get doctors together to work on a team where the focus of the team is the patient's health outcomes. And that's what we're seeing now, is this pivoting from what was originally a divisional structure where organizations were divided based on different body systems, to more of a matrix structure where healthcare professionals are on a team and the focus of the team is the patient's health. So there's more coordination between those individuals with a matrix structure. All right, so we're talking about task structure. It varies on coordination. The other aspect of task structure is regulation. Regulation is basically team level autonomy. How much freedom does the team have about what assignments they're going to do, how they're going to do them, how much of something they're going to make, who is allowed to be in the team? That's regulation. The business school is a really good example of a self-regulated team. So we choose our tasks, we choose which courses we're going to teach, we choose how those tasks are going to be completed, we choose who within the department is going to do that. That's not the dean giving that order and forcing us to do it. We do this based on committees and meetings and talking to each other. And so we really decide as a faculty about all this stuff. It isn't a top-down order. So we are highly self-regulated. We also control membership. So when we need a new professor, it's not HR doesn't go find a professor for the business school. We form a search committee. We put up a job posting. We look through the curriculum vitae, we go interview the candidate. We as the faculty do all of that. We decide who's going to be a member of our team. We also control membership by setting standards for students. So only students that reach this certain level of academic performance get to be a member of our organization. So that's an example of a team with incredibly high self-regulation. Amazon is another organization that is highly self-regulated. So when you get a job at Amazon headquarters, not like Amazon warehouse, different thing. But if you have a job at Amazon headquarters, it's up to you to pitch yourself to teams that exist within the organization. If you have a really good idea for a project, it's up to you to put a team together, put a budget together, make a proposal to your supervisor to get it funded. And so basically everything at Amazon is driven by these self-regulated teams who come up with an idea for a project, put together the membership, propose it, complete the project, disband, and then find another project to work on. Chipotle is an organization with really low self-regulation. So I go to Chipotle all the time because it's the best food ever. And for like a week straight, I'd go every day and the cashier would say, "Hey, do you want your receipt?" And he would hand it to me. And I'm like, "No." And I had the same cashier like 6 days in a row. And he was like, "Do you want your receipt? Do you want your receipt?" I'm like, "No, man, I was just here yesterday. You know I don't want my receipt." And he's like, "Yeah, I know. But there's a security camera in the corner and corporate has access to the video feed from that camera, and it's corporate guidelines that you offer the customer the receipt, and they will literally go through security camera footage for different locations of Chipotle, and they will spot check to make sure that employees are offering customers the receipts like they're supposed to. That is an incredibly high level of control. That would be low team regulation, right? The corporation is setting the behavior of the team in these very, very precise and specific ways. We're talking about the 5 design components of teams. We talked about goal clarity. We talked about task structure. The next thing we're going to talk about is team composition. Composition refers to who's on the team. So when we talk about team membership or team composition, we're really talking about diversity. And diversity is any attribute upon which people differ. There are 2 types of diversity. Observable diversity is the type of diversity that you can immediately see on someone. Age is a form of observable diversity. We can usually guess someone's age when we see them. Gender is usually observable. Ethnicity is often observable. Sometimes even things like religion is observable because people wear certain types of clothing that communicate their religion. It's something you can see on someone right away. Unobservable diversity refers to underlying attributes upon which people differ. So religion is often an unobservable diversity. You don't immediately know what religion someone is unless they're wearing special clothing that communicates that. Other examples would be things like your educational background. I don't know right off the bat what kind of school you went to, what kind of degree you have. Previous work experience, tenure at the organization might not be immediately observable. So those are the things that are going on inside of people that we can't immediately see the difference in. Values would be another example of that. So people differ in observable ways, and they also differ in these unobservable ways. There is a principle in teams and organizations called requisite variety. And requisite variety means that your team looks like your customers, that the people who work for your organization and in your team are representative of the type of people that are using your products. And there's this story about Mary Kay, the makeup company, that I think really epitomizes this. I read this story about Mary Kay in a textbook, and I've never been able to verify it, so I don't know if it's true or not. Take it with a grain of salt. It really gets across this idea of requisite variety, though, so I'm gonna share it. In the 60s and 70s, Mary Kay was like growing really quickly amongst white women, and white women really enjoyed and used their products. And they saw the African American market as this area for growth that was untapped that they could get into. And so they tried to market and sell their products to black women, and they were just really unsuccessful. Like, black women were not interested in Mary Kay makeup. And so the organization, which is run entirely by women, by the way, the organization invited their most successful African-American saleswoman to their executive board meeting, and they're like grilling her about why black women don't use Mary Kay makeup. And she was like, okay, this is what black women's skin looks like, and this is what the tone of your makeup looks like. And it was literally just the idea that they did not make the right tone of makeup for African-American women. It didn't match. And that's what requisite variety means, that if to understand your customer and to make the product in a way that appeals to them, your team should look like your customer base. Now, I know that sounds like a ridiculous story. Like, how could they not be aware that they had to make makeup specifically for black women if they wanted to get into the market? But there are tons of examples of this. Barbie, the first black Barbie didn't come out until 1981, and the original Barbie was released in the late 40s, early 50s. So it took them like 30 years to be like, oh, maybe we should make a black Barbie. Johnson & Johnson still doesn't make black Band-Aids. In an incredibly ethnocentric move, they say that they sell flesh-colored Band-Aids, but they don't make black Band-Aids. You can get there are other companies that make black Band-Aids, but Johnson & Johnson does not. So yeah, it seems really obvious that if you want to get into a certain market, you have to make products that appeal to them. But without having a team that looks like that market that you're going into, it's going to be more difficult to do. So although there are benefits to having diverse groups, we often see more conflict in diverse groups. There are 2 types of conflict. The first type of conflict is interpersonal conflict. Interpersonal conflict is when I don't like you. That there is something about you personally, the way you do your work, the quality of the work, the way you talk to me, your attitude, something about you that I don't like. That's interpersonal conflict. And interpersonal conflict is bad for performance. The more interpersonal conflict in your team, in your organization, the more that's going to hurt performance. The other type of conflict is task conflict. Task conflict is when we disagree about what we should be doing, how we should be doing it, how we define success, processes within the team. That's task conflict. That's good for performance because that makes everyone on the team question, how are they doing things? How can we do things better? What's the best way to do this? Questioning and critically thinking about your performance. That's good. That leads to positive outcomes on teams. So diversity leads to both types of conflict, more interpersonal conflict and more task conflict. The interpersonal conflict is a drag on performance. Task conflict facilitates performance. We often hear people talking about the importance of diversity, and they say that diversity is good for performance. That is not always true. The research shows that there are times when diversity is good for performance, and there are times when diversity is not good for performance. And people have ideological reasons for arguing that diversity is important for organizational success. So people want diverse organizations, and so they point to research that supports that more diverse organizations are more successful. There's also research showing that certain types of diversity, it's less successful. I'm not saying diversity is not important. I think diversity is incredibly important. I'm saying it's more important than performance. And I think that we should care about diversity whether or not it facilitates performance. So let's talk about some reasons why we should care about diversity other than organizational performance. We should care about diversity for legal reasons. So we live in a country where we as a society have decided that diversity is important to us, that we don't want discrimination and prejudice allowed in the organizations in our country. And so we have laws against that. So as an organization, you should care about diversity, not just for performance reasons, but to make sure that you're following the laws of society. And of course that means like protecting yourself, but also the laws represent the values of society, right? And so diversity is a way of honoring the values that we have expressed as a society. And then for me, the most compelling reason is social justice reasons, that we should care about diversity for diversity's sake, that we have an incredibly diverse population in this country. And yet the people with power in this country are much less diverse. There are 500 CEOs, the Fortune 500 CEOs, 24 of them are women. That is not representative of the diversity of our country. It's not representative when you look at minority status or sexual orientation. And the same, we see the exact same thing in our government as well. And so I think we should believe in diversity for the sake of diversity, that everyone in the society should be equally vested and have equal access to power, whether through the government or through businesses. And so we should care about diversity because it makes our country a stronger place, because it is for no other reason that diversity is a good thing. Lastly, organizations should care about diversity because they have to. We are living in an incredibly diverse country, and it is becoming more and more diverse. Soon, whites will no longer make up a majority of the population, so we'll still be the biggest demographic segment, but will no longer be over 50%. Will be a plurality, but not a majority. And the country is just becoming more and more diverse. So the context that organizations are operating in, the labor pool that they're pulling from, the customers that they're selling to, are becoming more diverse. And whether you want to accept diversity or not, you're going to have to, because we live in a diverse country. All right, today we're talking about the 5 design components of teams. We've talked about goal clarity, task structure, and composition. The next thing we're going to talk about is function. Team functioning is about how the group communicates and makes decisions. So some things you can think about in regard to functioning is, do you have a communication setup or process within the team where it's really just one person coordinating and managing the work of all the others who work kind of independently? Or is it more of a type of communication structure where everyone communicates with everyone else? Also, how do teammates communicate? Do they communicate in person mainly, over email, through memos, through presentations, meetings? How often does the group get together, and how do they communicate and exchange information? Team functioning also deals with how the team makes decisions. So is it, an autocracy where one person makes all the decisions, or is the team more democratic where the whole team needs to vote to approve something? Okay, today we're talking about team structure, and we've talked about goal clarity, task structure, composition, and function. The last thing we're going to talk about is performance norms. Performance norms are norms, kind of these unspoken rules, beliefs about what levels of performance are acceptable and how people should behave around the office. If you've ever been on a group project, which I'm sure you have, you'll realize that you have different performance norms than other people. So there's the person on the team that has the performance norm of, hey, I just want to pass the class. C is good enough for me. And then there are people who are like, I want to get an A in the class and get perfect, perfect score. And they have these different beliefs about performance coming into the team. Norms govern many behaviors within a team. So when you're at your team meeting, well, first of all, does your team meeting start on time? Does everyone get there 5 minutes early? Do people wander in 10 or 15 minutes late? Those are norms about punctuality. When you're in the meeting, are you all focused on each other, or do you have your laptops out? Are you checking your cell phone? Is that okay? That's a behavioral norm. There's often not an explicit rule about it. It's just what everyone does. Those are behavioral norms. The way you dress in your organization is largely a function of behavioral norms. So norms are these unspoken rules that govern team behavior. Leadership has a powerful influence on norms. One semester, this has only happened once ever in my 10 years of teaching in universities, I mixed up the time and date of my first lecture for a class, and I missed the first class. And it was my undergraduate business communications class, which is a class where my first lecture is about how if you want to be successful in this class, you have to be punctual, you have to be here, you have to turn your assignments in on time, you have to be organized and detail-oriented, right? This lecture I give them about how important it is to be organized and responsible, and I missed that lecture, right? So I come into the second day of class, I give that lecture sheepishly, and then the very next day I get the flu and I'm out for the next week with the flu. So I end up missing 3 out of the first 4 classes for that course. And the rest of the class I had problems with absenteeism. Students just wouldn't show up. And it's because I had set the behavioral norm, right? I had told them that attendance was important, but my behavior had expressed to them it was not. My behavior made it normal for them to miss class as well. So that's what I mean by behavioral norms, and leadership has a really powerful influence on that. Today we talked about the 5 design components of teams. We talked about goal clarity, task structure, composition, function, and norms.